Ivan Shaw is the corporate photography director for the Condé Nast Archive, where he produces books and exhibitions. Previously, he worked closely with Anna Wintour as the photography editor for Vogue magazine, a position he was in for 20 years. His most recent book is called Patty Hansen, A Portrait. How does one become the archivist of Condé Nast? Like most people in photography, did you want to be a photographer starting out?
I did. I got into photography in high school, and I started working at a bi-weekly business newspaper in Worcester, Massachusetts. When I was studying at Clark University, my dad was in the newspaper business. I fell in love with photography. I started working as an assistant photographer in the darkroom. I'll be the first to admit it's really fun to work for a super successful magazine because you really have entree to so many things. Right. And when I would meet people who are just starting at the magazine, I would say, really take advantage of every opportunity that the magazine will afford you. And so in 1994, Charlie, who was the design director of Vanity Fair, was asked to become the design director of Vogue and redo the magazine. He asked me to come with him. And so I went to Vogue and worked in the art department in 1994. And in April of 1996, they made me photo editor. So I jumped up. I really wanted to be a photo editor, and Anna Wintour, as is her way, she gave me a shot. I was on probation for the first 6 months of the job, like I was either going to make it or not make it. I certainly didn't have the resume for the job, but I had the passion. It was the mid-90s, and there were just amazing photographers, and I really just went with my instincts. But what I realized after is Vogue started in 1892, and you realize there are things about the magazine and things about the people that work there that have been consistent for 125 years. We had some of the greatest photographers of the 20th century working for the magazine at that time. So we would have an issue where you'd have Irving Penn, Helmut Newton, Annie Leibovitz, Herb Ritz, Bruce Weber, all in the same issue. And for a magazine to do that was extraordinary.
Does it feel like a come down? And this is a question about kind of the changes in print media and maybe fashion photography too. But as a result, I think of just the distribution of so much photography. Everyone's a photographer.
There's a lot of bitterness and anger and resentment. And I really believe in the future. I accept the fact that that thing that we did is over. But also I think aesthetics are changing radically in fashion photography and in fashion. If you look at the September cover of Vogue, Beyonce photographed by Tyler Mitchell, it's a completely different aesthetic. And I think it's actually excellent. One of the most exciting things is we have a whole young generation of female photographers working now. So that was this huge flip from a predominantly male perspective on fashion to now a female perspective on fashion. And they see women and they see clothes differently.
I think there's always like a reciprocity between the fashion photography and the actual clothes that are being made.
I think the biggest thing is we have a real breakdown in gender-specific clothing. I mean, that's just huge, and you have to kind of start off right there. Whether it be male, female, or gay, straight, okay? And I think in our generation, those lines were pretty clear. What I see with younger people now is it's completely blurred. And that's a tough one for all of us, because we're not, as much as accepting of it as we are.
It's not political, it's not, limiting. It's just that this is the way I was structured to think about things.
Absolutely. If you look at, say, Gucci right now, and you look at the men's collection of Gucci, Alessandro Michele, he's doing things that are not gender specific. I think that's a huge step. And I think the idea of diversity, the embracing of African American culture and cross cultures, Virgil Abloh doing Louis Vuitton, all those kind of systems that we all kind of lived under have been broken down.
But I think what you're talking about is a generalized idea of showing that kind of diversity.
Absolutely, and you could say, well, what business does a fashion magazine have to do with politics, et cetera, having to get involved in politics? But I think there's one basic element that's important in terms of a fashion magazine is that the scale. Not only do you have 1.2 million subscribers, then you have the newsstand, but if an issue is at a hair salon, 100 people see it. So the impact of a magazine and the scale of a magazine, I think, is what makes it important as well. It's easy for people not in fashion or not in film or not in the art world to make fun of it, But I think that's right. It's easy to make fun of lawyers. It's easier to make fun of accountants. You can make fun of anybody, politicians, if you choose to.
Print media has been struggling. Book publishing has been struggling. I mean, from the inside, what have you seen happening that seems to be working for those?
We know that print is in decline, and we kind of have to accept that.
For better or worse.
Better or worse, it's not going to go away. I always think of it as much as I love magazines on an emotional level, to print something has become an inefficient technology. There's no reason to put something on a piece of paper anymore to distribute it. The difficulty for historic print houses like Condé Nast is that our core business is print, right? Our audience is not so bad. It's the advertisers, because they're saying, well, instead of spending $1 million in print, I want to spend $100,000 in 10 ways or $50,000 in 20 ways. I don't think there will be a magic bullet in a way, right? So I don't think it's like, oh, somebody's going to come up with something that's going to immediately balance out the loss in print, because print was a really good business for a long time. For like 150 years, it worked really well. Magazines worked. We do know that people want content. They want to be connected. They want to read stories. They want to be inspired.
And Vogue can still put its brand on that kind of content and distribute that in a different way, as well as print the magazine.
Yeah, there's a lot of media out there. There's a lot of interesting people saying things, but you can't just replicate the New Yorker. Right. You can't replicate Vogue.
So what's it like then on the book publishing front? I mean, you've just done this new book, Patty Hansen, a portrait about the model Patty Hansen from the archive.
One of the things that I'm trying to develop right now, which is as opposed to looking at the book of like, okay, I'm going to do a book and then I'll see how many people buy it, or, I try to look at it as it's an opportunity to do other things. I know that people want to connect, especially now in the digital age, where it's so easy to become disconnected. So I can create a book, but I think with a book you have to tell a story. It has to resonate, and then you can kind of go out in the world with it and start creating opportunities around it for people to connect. I'm a big believer in the idea of tribes. It's not about getting 1 million people to read my book or look at my book. They're not going to, but if I can find 1,000 people that are really interested in this and connect to them. Like, for instance, Instagram has 1 billion people, and they've got Kardashians with 50 million followers. So the metrics have completely shifted, right? So you can't win that game.
Getting around that corporate mathematical mindset that you have to win in the numbers game all the time, and it's something we argue about all the time in curating or doing certain kinds of art projects, nonprofit type things. Is it's not about how many people you got in to see it; it's about the experience that group of people had, and that's a really hard thing to quantify. It's sometimes hard to justify that to the people who pay the bills.
It's not so much about creating something that can get this immediate kind of friction, although we'll take that if we can get it. It's creating something that will last.
As a magazine person, is there a favorite cover that stands out?
The cover that we did of Vogue of Oprah Winfrey with Stephen Meisel in the late 90s was a real game changer in so many ways, that we put Oprah on the cover and she looked amazing. As a cultural moment, it was really amazing for us to essentially bring Oprah to Vogue and Vogue to go to Oprah. It really resonated culturally at that time.
I think it's a little the question of how do you create something that is an instant classic, or how do you aim for something that you hope will be a classic versus something that you know will hit and make a splash and get you sort of 3 feet ahead.
It's a hard balance. You kind of want both. There was a quote from Miles Davis about jazz, and he said, jazz sort of ruined itself when musicians started playing for other musicians and stopped playing for the audience. I think that's a really important point. And I think about that as a magazine person, and I know something that Anna used to say to me, like, think about the reader.